Good morning and welcome to QI Power Hour. I also want to give a special welcome to those of you who are joining QI Power for the first time. This is Deborah Wright with the Health Quality Council, and we're excited to have you all here. QI Power Hour is a free monthly WebEx offering hosted by the Health Quality Council here in Saskatchewan. We provide an opportunity for colleagues across healthcare as well as other industries to hear from local and national improvement experts on a variety of quality improvement-related topics. Now, just a reminder that following today's session, a recording of the event will be posted to our HQC website for you to share out with colleagues who were unable to join us here today. We also invite you to check out recordings and presentations of past sessions on demand at the address listed on your screen. While you're on our Health Quality Council website, we also invite you to sign up for our distribution list to ensure that you receive regular invites to all our upcoming QI Power Hour sessions. Over the last number of months, we've been delighted to see how QI Power Hour has continued to spread throughout our province within our provincial healthcare system, as well as to those other organizations in Saskatchewan who have an interest in quality improvement. We've also begun to see spread of other organizations within Canada and even abroad. Again, welcome everyone to QI Power Hour. Now, we'd like to encourage folks to share their questions and insights during today's session by making use of the chat function. You'll find the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. You can access the chat function by clicking on the message bubble on the top right-hand of your screen. We encourage you to share your questions, comments, and ideas throughout the presentation. We'll also have some dedicated Q&A at the end of today's presentation. Please send your questions to all participants so we can all join in the discussion. Let's take a moment to practice the function by typing in the chat the name of the organization you're joining from today. All right, so we've got folks from the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Good morning from, Sask Docs, wonderful, welcome. Hello from Shalimar. Great, so it looks like everyone's starting to find the chat function, so we're good to go. All right, now, finally, we'll also invite you to log into your Twitter account and tweet out during the session to share your learnings. You can use the hashtag QIPowerHour and the handle HQCSask. And for today's session, we also invite you to use the handle @DougACampbell to interact with our speaker. So now I'd like to introduce Doug. Doug is a provincial improvement consultant at the Saskatchewan Health Quality Council with a background in biomedical engineering. He's a graduate of the Intermountain Advanced Training Program for Healthcare Delivery, the Dartmouth Institute Clinical Microsystems Team Coaching Program, and is a certified lean leader. He is currently one of 18 international candidates undergoing training to become Citizen Scientist-Astronauts with the Untethered Exploration project. So with that, I'll hand it over to Doug.
All right. I'm just going to turn my video on so you can actually see me this morning. So give me 1 second. And I think we're good to go. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for choosing to spend your time attending today's QI Power Hour. Today, my plan is to take you through a framework that I found really works for me in developing a new skill quickly. I'll share some of the ways that I've learned to leverage not only learning the skill, but also learning about yourself. And then I'll discuss how that individual framework for learning can be translated into a team environment. As I do this, I'll first explain the concept, then I'll share some of the learnings that I've had, and then I'll share what that concept might look like in a healthcare setting. But first, a little bit about me. So if you've been to these before, you would know I'm not new to the QI Power Hour area. You might recognize me from such presentations as measurement and data, understanding variation the sequel, creating control charts, which was really just variation part 3, and how to cascade measures. However, today I'm a little extra excited, but also a little bit nervous, as this is the first time that I get to present something that's based upon my own experiences and learnings, and not presenting work that's been done by a leading expert in the field. The background for this talk comes not from my work at HTC, although that has obviously influenced me, but from the work that I've been doing outside of HQC. As this is a presentation about my learnings, I think maybe it would be helpful for you to know some of my background. So I was born and raised in Saskatoon. I attended the University of Saskatchewan after finishing high school, where I've completed 3 different engineering degrees there. I still live in Saskatoon with my wife and our cat, but our family is getting a little bit larger as we're expecting a baby in December. That's not the only big change that's coming up in my life. Today is actually my last day with the Health Quality Council, as I'm moving to a position within the Health Authority as Director of Strategy and Innovation. So while today is both sad and exciting for me, I'm really glad I get the opportunity to present on this topic for you today. And on that note, I think it's time that we dive right in.
Just going to pause a sec because we're getting some notes that the audio is not awesome. So we're just going to flip over to a different audio source. So if you could just give us 1 second.
Okay. Give me a deal. And do you want using here?
Okay, so I think we're switched on to my chat. My apologies for the loud noise. If I could get someone just to type into the chat that you can hear me clearly, I would really appreciate that. Perfect. A couple people saying much better, so we'll go, and hopefully hearing is okay after that lovely siren. So first off, this is back to the framework for learning, and I guess part of learning is being ready for whatever comes at you, so happy Friday. So really any good presentation starts off with a story, and mine happens to be a bit of a story of failure. So during the summer of 2016, the Canadian Space Agency put out a call to select 2 new astronauts. When I was little, I'd always wanted to be an astronaut. I loved visiting the Kennedy Space Center, seeing the huge rockets, and thinking what it would be like to sit on top of one and blast into space one day. So when the call for astronauts came out, it was a no-brainer. I had to throw my name in that selection pool. I made it farther than most in the selection. However, I was eliminated before the final 100 were picked that actually got to interview in person and have their skills put to the test. After getting over that initial disappointment, I tried to think through what the other candidates had that I was lacking. And honestly, there was a ton of skills and credentials that those selected had that I didn't. And that was my first big learning, that if I ever wanted to go to space, I was going to need to learn a lot of new skills in order to compete with the best. To learn those new skills, I went to a skill that I did know I have, which is looking stuff up on Google. So there I searched for ways that I could develop the skills required for space travel. And I came across an article that my boss had actually sent me a few months before, but it just hadn't registered with me as well at that time. In the article, they highlighted 2 Canadians that were part of something called the Phenom Project. The Phenom Project, which was started by an American nonprofit called the Sea and Space Society, which is now actually known as Untethered Exploration, was looking for a cohort of 20 people to train as Citizen Scientist-Astronaut candidates, with the ultimate goal of having a crew trained to do research in microgravity environments, which actually means space as well as underwater. After a brief selection process, I was selected as one of those candidates. I joined other engineers, scientists, physicians, pilots, military officers, and researchers from Canada, the United States, India, and Egypt as part of that cohort. In this program, I've got to do some pretty incredible things. I've done sea survival training, land survival training, high-altitude hypoxia training, which essentially is where you're put into a really big tube and they slowly take all the oxygen out so you can feel what it's like to be in an environment where there's less oxygen than there should be. And that's something that's really important when you're flying at high altitudes or diving deep underwater. You need to know what those feelings are before something really starts to go wrong. I've done aerobatic flight training, and I've finished up my scuba certification, as well as spending a whole lot of time reading and learning in the evenings and on the weekend. This April, that training culminated in doing a 2-week analog mission at the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, which I will talk about a little bit more towards the end of this presentation. Having a decent amount of time to think and reflect on my experiences while I was at the Mars Desert Research Station, a model for the way we were conducting training started to become clear in my head, and then one day it actually just clicked. So here's an example of one of our training experiences, and see if you can determine the model that the program's using, and then feel free to put it in the chat. So the setting for water survival school was in Panama City, Florida. It's along the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and just for your reference, it's actually closer to New Orleans than to Disney World if you're thinking about the geography of Florida. The first thing we did when learning about water survival was to do classroom education at the hotel. We then proceeded out to the marina to get on a boat where we had more instruction on board about surviving in the water alone and as a team. At that point, we went out into the bay in front of the marina and spent the next few hours in the water learning how to survive. It was daylight out, we weren't that far from shore, and there were lots of boats around in case anything unexpected happened. After floating in the water for a while, in something that was just essentially a big garbage bag, we got back in the boat, discussed what we had been through, and learned more techniques for surviving on the water. By this point, the sun had gone down, and our boat was heading out into the Gulf of Mexico. When we were far enough out that I couldn't actually see the lights on the shore anymore, the boat stopped. We were sent off the boat into the pitch-black waters of the Gulf of Mexico and tasked with surviving in the water until we got onto our life raft, where we stayed for longer, bobbing up and down, trying to stay warm until we were able to signal a boat that we needed rescue. Once we signaled that boat, we were picked up and transported back to shore. So that's the basic structure of our sea survival training. Any thoughts that people have in the chat on what that process looked like behind organizing the training that way? And I'll open up the chat here to see what you're thinking. And it's okay if you don't quite see the structure yet, because I'll run through it in the next few slides. But I'd be curious if anyone has some guesses based on the way they've done some learning in the past. So Dale says incremental steps, training built up. Jennifer said how many hours in the water total? I was out there from about noon until about 11 p.m. So actually in the water, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 of those hours, but out on the water about 11. So yeah, I agree. It kind of sounds like a PDSA, says Dwayne. So I'll break down the structure. So pictured on the screen is the model that became clear in my head once we had time to reflect on our training. Basically, it starts with being introduced to the skill. Then you practice that skill in a safe environment. Then you practice it in a high-stakes environment. And all throughout that process, you continue to talk and discuss about what you've been learning. While this was never explicitly stated in our training, this is the framework that we kept following over and over again. And for me, I feel like it really accelerated that learning process dramatically. Research into adult learning shows that everyone has preferences in how they learn. But for me, I found that this method really helps the learning stay with me over time. Maybe it has something to do with the stress of that high-stakes environment and the feeling that I really do need to know what I'm doing or something bad could happen that helps make that information stick. Maybe it's because of the scaled repetition that builds up to an authentic learning environment. Whatever it is, I find that this is a really great way to learn something quickly and then have it stick with me. So in preparing for this QI Power Hour, it was mentioned to me that the format used by our program bears similarities to something called the 4CID method and the authentic learning model. So I'd recommend reading more about them if structures of learning are something that you're interested in. I think there'll be a link in the chat. So we'll break down the framework a little bit and give examples of what this has looked like in our training. So the first thing is to be introduced to the skill. Introducing the skill has been done in several ways. One simple way to do this is just reading. I've read a ton of books and journal articles in the last couple of years to study new topics. A second method that I really like is when we have our peers teach us about their areas of expertise. For example, one member of our team is a retired Navy diver who lectured us on what happens to your body when you dive and when you go on a spacewalk, because they're actually very similar experiences. Another teammate, who randomly enough is actually training as a surgeon in the province of Saskatchewan right now, lectured us on wilderness first aid and how to care for someone that gets hurt when you don't have immediate access to emergency care. Another place to learn new skills and develop new learning is actually YouTube. Videos on there can teach you anything, including the skills that we use for doing quality improvement in healthcare. There's really endless amounts of info on there, and lots of cat videos if that's your thing. But they're really easy to digest because they're usually short clips, and you can learn something new each week if that's what you're interested in. Really, it just goes to show that there's lots of ways to be introduced to new skills, and depending on the situation and what you want to learn, there's several ways you can start down that path to getting better at something. One of the things that stuck with me the most when we were learning about what skills it takes to be an astronaut occurred during our first face-to-face gathering in Florida. We had the opportunity to spend the morning with Dr. Story Musgrave. He's a NASA astronaut that flew 6 times on the space shuttle, and he was a specialist on the Hubble telescope. What he said was, figure out how to differentiate yourself. Determine what it is that makes you different from everyone else that wants a job that you want, and what else you could do to further differentiate yourself from those people. If you can do that, you have a much better chance of succeeding in achieving your goals. So the drive to learn new skills and differentiate myself came out of my pursuit of space, but I think that translates to the work we do in healthcare as well. What is it that makes me unique and valuable at HQC? What could I do to make myself even more valuable? How can we help the people we work with find the value that they bring to a team so that they can leverage it and make themselves stand out? Figuring out what differentiates you is a good place for choosing what skills you want to develop next. Building upon your strengths to make them stand out even further is something that is likely to differentiate you from others in your field. Once you've got a general grasp of the task and skill that you're trying to learn, the next step is to try it out in a safe environment. But like our experience of learning water survival during daylight in a bay near the shore, find a place or a situation where you can test out your new skill but still feel supported and not at risk for drowning, so to speak. That safe environment can vary drastically, though. For example, if the skill you're working on is public speaking, the safe environment might be very different from person to person. Some people might feel safe practicing speaking to a small group. Others might feel safe only speaking to a family member. Others might feel safe in front of a large crowd. That safe space to try new skills and what it is isn't important. What is important is that it allows you to try something new without the worry of catastrophic failure. Next is the part of the framework where things can get a little bit uncomfortable, and that's the entire point. It's about pushing yourself to practice your new skills in a high-stakes environment. So what you see on the screen is the high-stakes part of learning to make decisions under pressure. In our training, we spent time in Florida doing high-gravity flight training. You could probably also call this stunt flying. There were 2 objectives to this. The first was to experience the forces that occur during spaceflight, from the high forces of launch to the microgravity environment of space where it seems like you're floating. But the second objective was to have us make decisions in situations that can literally be life and death. You need to think and decide quickly when you're flying planes like this, because they can go out of control quite easily. In the video that I hope you can see on the screen, I'm actually in the front seat of that airplane. This isn't a simulation, and despite how choppy the frame rate might appear on your screen, this maneuver was purposely done, so we stalled the airplane, which put it out of control, and caused it to dive back rapidly at the Earth. There's a specific set of things that you need to do in the correct order to control the plane, and you need to do it all with the ground rushing at your face. So this is definitely a high-stakes environment, but it really does help to set the learnings in stone that we've had and gives you confidence that you can execute when you need to. I'm sure there's a few of you on the call that are thinking, yeah, get real, like a high-stress environment is going to help me, come on. And you know what, that's a pretty fair response. However, it's not just my opinion that this works. A similar take was shared recently in the Harvard Business Review. The Navy SEALs, who are an elite military force from the United States, say that under stress you sink to the level of your training. So to me that signifies that if you scale up your practice by starting in a safe place and training up to a high-level environment, even in that high-stress situation, your skills will remain no matter what situations you're facing. A good example of how this model all works together is the process of learning to drive. I'm assuming that most of us started out by learning the basic skills by watching people around us drive. Then we probably took some kind of a formal course in driver's education. Then we practiced somewhere safe. Maybe if you grew up in a rural area of Saskatchewan, you might have practiced a little earlier than some of the others. But then we gradually proceeded onto roads and highways. It's really unlikely that any of us just hopped into a car and started to learn to drive on the 6-lane freeways of Los Angeles. However, the skills that we learned along the way do lead us to success when we hit those stressful 6-lane highways. As we drive on those highways, we learn new things about traveling in multiple lanes, when to get over to get off a freeway. That makes us better drivers in the end, but we've scaled up to it. Nobody has to push themselves outside of their comfort zone, but if you can learn to do that, it really does tend to push your learning to the next level. But it is important to note that testing a skill in a high-stakes environment doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a short, stressful situation. When we did land survival training, we spent 2.5 days out in the Everglades of Florida practicing skills that would allow us to survive if we were ever in a situation where our spacecraft landed somewhere it really wasn't supposed to. In these authentic training situations, there are more opportunities to practice the skills, which is really nice because you have more time. But there's also a lot more time where you need to stay focused, which can also be a learning situation in itself. That extended time is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, which is what I'll be covering next. In quality improvement, RPIWs or Kaizen events could be thought of as a longer duration training opportunity. Not only are you practicing the skills that you've learned in a safe environment, but you're practicing them in that high stakes environment. Time is also a factor, as it can have an effect on both you and your team as you go through those improvement events. The final step in this model for learning is to debrief on the process. But really it's actually more of an intertwined step than a standalone step that should occur throughout the whole process. While it's good to practice a new skill, it's even better to debrief about what happened when you tried it after. This can be something we can do on our own, in a small group, or in a large group. Thinking through the things that went well so we can build upon them, and identifying the things that could have gone better so we can fix them, is quite possibly the most important part of the process. It really helps to reinforce the good things that you're doing well, and help fix the things that need to be improved. What I've found is really helpful in learning a new skill is to debrief with a coach or an expert that knows the skill well. Their insights have tended to save me a lot of time it would have taken to figure things out on my own. So now I'll ask a question to the group. Have you used a similar model to this, or can you think of a similar situation where you wished you had used a model like this when you were learning something, instead of maybe getting thrown into the deep end? And again, I'll look to the chat for your responses. Also, thank you to Caroline at HTC for putting the links into the chat so people can find these articles that I've been referencing. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any, so I don't mind going on, but if you want to think through it, feel free to add to the chat as we go. And we've got Shalimar saying, yes, I use this model for teaching lilt and my own learning, so excellent. I'm glad it's something that's kind of being used around the province as well. It's not rocket science, so to speak. So speaking from personal experience, in the past when I learned something new, I was really just focused on learning that new skill, but I wasn't really paying attention to anything else, to be honest. But in this program, I've seen a method for learning about more than just the skill, which is where I think the value of this QI Power Hour really comes in. Doing that starts in the debriefing the process step. While talking through what went well and what could have gone better, what we've learned is also talking through how you're feeling and how you reacted to the situation is just as important as the discussion about the skill. And that's how you multiply your learning. You don't just learn the skill, but you also make a conscious effort to learn about yourself. There are several ways to debrief the process in a way that allows you to understand your own tendencies better. One way is journaling, so basically just writing down a stream of consciousness about what you were working on and how it went. You could also do a blog, you could do a podcast, you could do a social media post. Essentially, you could do anything that helps take the thoughts out of your head and puts it into a medium where you'll be able to go back and start looking for patterns. There's probably a medium that would work best for each person, but what I found works really well for me was journaling or blogging in order to get my thoughts out so that I could go back and look through them. To do this, I used Microsoft OneNote because I like the simplicity with which I can organize things by day or by skill. Each day when I was at the Mars Desert Research Station, I would blog about what I'd done, where I'd been, what the plan for the day was, and what we were going to do for the rest of the day. And then I'd include some pictures to make it a little bit more interesting, so it wasn't just text. Having everything in one place allowed me to go back after the fact and pick up learnings about myself that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. It's that self-reflection that I've been able to use to develop myself quicker while also developing new skills. To give some insights into what I learned about myself when I was at the Mars Desert Research Station, well, what I was able to see was that I had a pretty consistent theme in my writing, and that's that it was much more positive in the morning than in the evening. More frustrations tended to creep into my writing as the day went on. One of the things that I did with this information was to have difficult conversations earlier in the day because I was more likely to be open to tough dialogue at that time, rather than later in the day where I was apparently getting a little bit more testy. That being said, I didn't lose my cool during the mission, and I attribute that to the blogging I was doing as an outlet for the frustrations, so that they didn't boil over and I didn't start yelling at someone. That's also the reason I haven't published any of these blogs that I wrote. While it was a really good outlet for me to vent the frustrations I was feeling, it certainly doesn't need to be made public, as it wouldn't be fair to my crewmates, because I'm sure there were days I was frustrating them just as much as they were frustrating me. I was also able to learn about my teammates from writing. So I was able to see patterns in their behavior so that I knew how to work with them best at certain times of the day. Another good part about having things written down was that when there was an issue that needed to be discussed with the team, I had my recollection of the situation written down and was able to refer to it instead of just relying on my memory, which can be a little bit sketchy. Another learning that was clear to me was that I needed some time to be alone to recharge my batteries. I like being around others, and I really do enjoy working in a team, but I also needed to carve out some time so that I could relax and reflect in order to be more useful for the rest of the day. I think that's a learning that probably translates to most of us that work in healthcare. Days can be very busy, and we can be under a lot of stress, but if there's a little bit of a way to carve out even a couple minutes for yourself, it'll probably make the rest of your day more effective. At least I know that's the case for me. So how does journaling and self-reflection look in a healthcare setting? Well, one example is when quality improvement consultants or leaders or coaches journal their thoughts on what they're doing when they're coaching a team. Actually, one of the requirements of graduating the Dartmouth Clinical Microsystem Coaching Program was to keep a coaching journal for the duration of the program. You were supposed to write down your thoughts on what you tried with the team and why it worked or why it didn't work. By doing this, you had to think through the way that you were coaching the team, and you wanted to continue doing the things that were working while discarding or tweaking the things that just weren't working. Doing this not only helped the team develop faster, but honestly it helps the coach become better at the same time. Another translation of my learnings is understanding what time of day is better to have a crucial conversation, because selecting that time of day can also be the difference between success and failure. Having an important conversation at the end of the day, if that's the time you tend to feel worse, could be really damaging, but having that same conversation at 9 in the morning might get you to a much better place, or vice versa, depending on the type of person that you are. Many of my learnings were from self-reflection. However, learnings can be just as valuable if they come from others. Based upon my experience, there's some basics that need to be followed. Be honest and constructive with your team members when you give them positive and negative feedback. That can lead to very good discussions that will put issues to rest, but it also finds opportunities for improvement. One big takeaway for me is the way that I communicate in team meetings. I tend to let others speak first because I want to make sure they have the opportunities to say what they want. However, it was pointed out to me that doing this makes it seem like I'm either not interested in contributing or I'm just interested in having the last word. While that's not my intention, I could absolutely see how that was coming across. So now I make an effort to let others speak, but also to contribute my thoughts earlier. Having those discussions as a team is a really good segue into how the framework for building team skills can translate well from the individual setting to a team environment. That exact same model for learning can be used, but with a little bit of a tweak to make it fit better when you look at it from a team perspective. The main change is adding in why this skill is important for the team to master. Adding in the team why gives everyone the same sense of direction, and it highlights that we're all working towards the same goal. Here's an example of how team learning in a high-stakes environment is being done in British healthcare. A Formula One racing team that's very well versed in changing tires and working together under stress are collaborating with doctors working on resuscitation of newborn babies. The F1 team has been invited to observe the neonatal unit of the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff, while doctors from the hospital went to the team's factory in Oxfordshire to see how they work together. The doctors recognized that both pit stops and resuscitation of babies requires a team of people to work quickly in an environment where space is limited. This shows the power of harvesting learnings from a high-stakes situation and collaborating and debriefing with others to gain their insights. To give a full illustration of how the model for learning works in a team environment, again, I'm going to use the sea survival training as our example. So the skill we were building together was how to survive as a team in the water. But the why had a few parts to it, actually. We were there to, learn the skill, but we were also there to build camaraderie among the team so that we would be prepared to work together in stressful situations. While we learned the skills that would help us survive as an individual in the water, we also learned team methods for survival. We learned how to work together to get into the life raft, learned what worked and what didn't when we were in the water, and learned how to communicate effectively with each other. And this was extremely important as we actually have a team member who is deaf, so learning how best to communicate with him was extremely important. We attempted this for the first time in the safety of the bay during daylight hours, but we then had to do this again in the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of the night. Just like in the individual learning model, the team was able to learn the skills quickly and achieve our goals by following that stepped learning process. However, for the Phenom team, the ultimate goal is to travel to space to do research. But our near-term goal was to build the skills we would need to thrive in a 2-week mission simulation at the Mars Desert Research Station. The Mars Desert Research Station is located in the high desert of Utah, and it's one of the most Mars-like places on Earth. It's extremely dry, there's no vegetation to speak of. I don't think I saw any wildlife during my 2 weeks there, although someone did see a snake, but I didn't. And there's really no cities or towns nearby. The closest town is roughly a 25-minute drive away. Our mission there was a 2-week simulation of a Mars mission. So that means we're living in the structure that you can see pictured as a team of 5 for 2 straight weeks. We can't go outside unless we're fully suited up in a spacesuit, and we needed permission from Mission Control to go on any spacewalks. So this is supposed to be an analog environment, essentially as accurate as you can get without actually going to Mars. So for roughly 20 of the 24 hours each day, I was living with 4 other people in the upper level of a cylinder that is 8 meters in diameter. We had research projects to complete while we were in simulation, which helped to pass the time. But the bottom line is that there just wasn't a lot of personal space, so I needed to get really good at working with my teammates and communicating openly so that we didn't have any major issues that would derail the mission. Using my journal and blogging for self-reflection and for team reflection, there were some keys that I found help make a stressful team environment into a successful team environment, and I think that translates well into healthcare. So the first is to do the little things. This means putting away your garbage, washing the dishes, helping out in any possible way. If everyone on the team does the little things without being asked, it makes tackling the big things together a whole lot easier. Debriefing and communicating openly is necessary in a stressful team environment. When things get bottled up inside, they tend to come out at inopportune times and in ways that the person probably wouldn't prefer. I won't go into specifics, but there were a couple of issues that have had between teammates that occurred really just because the communication was lacking. I think my personal success in the mission came from learning what triggers me to get upset or become frustrated. Once I realized what behaviors or actions in others caused me to get into a bad mood, I was able to keep an eye out for it and address it before it got worse. Another key to success that can be hard to do, but that makes things so much better, is to build in time for fun. Almost every night, we dedicated an hour of our schedule to watching a DVD or playing cards. That helped us bond and put away the stress that had built up during the day. I know there's things we do here at HQC by celebrating birthdays as a team and organizing events to grow our relationships, but it's something we could do even more frequently to help build our team. There's also a couple of things I found really hurt the team in stressful situations. And that's when someone can become selfish or when there's unclear expectations for people on the team. Those are things that generate conflict and anger quite rapidly, and so we would have to spend a lot of time trying to repair the damage to the team that had been done if that occurred. There's a really great section in retired Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield's book about being either a +1 or a -1 on a team. Essentially, are you being a +1 and making things easier for others on the team, or are you being a -1 and making things harder for the people on the team? So keeping that in mind as we learn new skills really helped me keep on track to not be a hindrance to the team, but try and think through what I can do to help it function successfully. Those personal learnings that I had about what works and what doesn't at the Mars Desert Research Station also apply to working in teams in a healthcare setting, especially in team settings that can be stressful, like improvement events. Doing the little things like being on time for team meetings, responding to emails in a timely fashion, just saying hello to people when you walk by them in the hall, all have a positive effect on team chemistry. Effective and open communication in a team is as effective on Mars as it is in healthcare. In fact, we actually worked some of the best practices that I've learned at HQC into how we work together as a team there. Admittedly, our mission started off a little bit rocky on the communication front, but we did figure out early on that we needed to do better. So the first thing we did was implement twice daily team huddles. We would huddle first thing in the morning and check in on how everyone was doing. We'd reflect on what was going well and what needed to get better. Then we'd discuss the things that we needed to work on for the day. And while we weren't always great at it and we had to revisit some things a few times, The strategy of meeting and talking things out definitely helped the mission go a lot more smooth than it may have otherwise. When issues tended to linger, some people preferred to talk it out in a group and others preferred to do it privately. How to go about doing that was a personal preference, but learning about how our teammates like to communicate also helped grow our ability to live and work together in this very unique environment, and that's something we could do in healthcare as well. Another tool that we used that worked really well for our team was daily visual management. So we would set out who had what duties for the day, what the schedule looked like. That way we were all on the exact same page. Huddles and daily visual management are pretty easy things to do, but we found that they made a huge leap in our abilities to succeed as a team. Needless to say, no matter how much we worked on being a good team, there were still times that it felt like me in this picture, standing outside alone, being rained on. In a stressful situation, I think that's normal. It is what it is. But what is important was that I had a good team with me and we were able to learn and grow through the experiences. If I can leave you with a couple of key next steps to try from what I've learned with being in the Phenom program, is to seek out your own high-stakes environment when you learn a new skill. I'm not saying you need to fly upside down in a plane or jump into the Gulf of Mexico at night, but find something that pushes you a little bit outside of your comfort zone when you're learning a new skill. If you're trying to learn a new skill, start small and scale up. Practice definitely makes better, both as an individual and as a team. Another learning is to figure out a way of doing self-reflection that works for you. It'll give you insights in how you react in different situations and will make you a better part of a team. And then finally, debrief with others on what you're working on. Talk through what's going well and what isn't so that you can learn together as a team. So thank you for taking the time to listen today to this webinar. I was really excited to present it, and it's been an honor to have done 6 QI Power Hours with you over the last few years. And if I have any say in it, this won't be my last one. So, I'm happy to answer any questions if you'd like. Please use the chat, or I think if people want to unmute at this point, they probably can. Maybe they can't. Use the chat. I think we've locked you all out.
Thanks, Doug. We did have some questions emerge through the chat as you were presenting, and the first one that creeped in was wondering to know, did the team debrief process help to build trust?
I think it did. Maybe at the start it didn't initially, but as we became more comfortable with each other and we started answering honestly, even if we knew it might offend someone, that really did start to build trust, because we knew if I was saying something that might have bothered someone, they knew it was coming from a good place, and I knew they were willing to take that feedback in and examine it themselves. So I think that built a ton of trust really quickly, was the team debriefs and then having the honest conversations. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. The next one that we've seen come up is there's a bit of a question around whether or not you guys had developed a team charter where you kind of outline things in a bit more of a formal way, or did things kind of naturally emerge as you went?
Nothing formal was ever developed, so we don't have a team charter document. I would say informally, yeah, we followed all of the different categories I've seen in the team charter about how we'll work together, what those basic ground rules are, what our schedule is going to look like, when we're going to meet, how we're going to have those discussions. But we didn't do it formally, and you know what, that might have actually been a really good learning going into the Mars Desert Research Station. If I was ever to do that again, I think we would want to meet as a team and lay that out beforehand and agree to it instead of during, when we kind of had a moment where it's like, we need to change things or this isn't going to go well. It would be better to set that up beforehand.
Great. Now, we've also had a question about what advice would you give to future citizen astronauts if they were considering or going into this program? Sure.
I guess it would be to find something you're passionate about doing or learning. So when we were at the Mars Desert Research Station, a group of children actually came out to visit us as we got out of simulation. And a couple of them had that same question of like, what could I do to be an astronaut, or how do I get into this? And the answer was there is no right answer. So there's been astronauts that have been teachers, they've been physicians. But there was a little girl in the class that didn't put up her hand when we asked, like, oh, who wants to be an astronaut? And we asked her why, and she said, well, because I want to be an author and I want to write. And the honest answer was that would make a perfect astronaut. Someone who knows how to write and communicate would be a great person to go to space and bring back their learnings and be able to translate that to the public. So it doesn't matter what you want to do or what you're passionate about, just be good at what you're passionate about and you'll find a way to weave it in. So, I mean, science and medicine are the obvious ways to get into doing this, but I think there's so many other opportunities that no matter what you like, as long as you're good at it and passionate at it, it'll take you a long way.
All right. Now, building on an earlier question that we asked, kind of a follow-on is, did the debrief build trust, I'm reading not correctly. How did the debriefer build trust with you so that you felt comfortable sharing your learning?
By being honest was definitely the way for me that the trust was built. So I knew if they were speaking from the heart and giving me their opinions, then I trusted what they were saying and I knew it was coming from a good place. And I never had any moments when I doubted what they were saying or when I thought there was a secondary motive. It's the honesty is what builds trust with me.
Now we have another question. How did you guys set the ground rules before the debrief? Specific things that were done to get people to check their egos before the debrief and leave it thereafter?
We did it as a team, and I think it just sort of developed gradually over time. So I came in with a couple of the obvious ones that I've learned through working in QI and healthcare of everyone's opinion is correct. We're not here to judge others. Please feel free to speak your mind. Let people finish their thought, no interruptions, things like that. So came in with some of those basics for how we'd work as a team, and then they just continued to develop as we went on. But I mean, living with these 4 other people for 14 days, you have a lot of time to discuss and build those ground rules because you kind of get compacted into that. All right.
I'm just noticing if people do have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. We do have a little bit more time that we could entertain questions here if you have some.
Maybe while we're waiting for questions to come in.
Sure, yeah. While we're waiting, I do want to let people know that QI Power Hour will be breaking for the busy month of December, but we are thrilled to be kicking off the new year with Dr. Helen Bevan for our January session. Helen is no stranger to improvers here in Saskatchewan. We've been delighted to welcome her to our province on a number of occasions. Helen is the Chief Transformation Officer of the Horizons Group with the National Health Services in England. With over 25 years of leading large-scale change, Helen is acknowledged globally for her expertise and energy in large-scale change in health and care. Helen currently leads the Horizons team, which is a source of ideas and knowledge that enable the spread of improvements at scale. The team uses a variety of different tools and approaches, including social movement thinking, community organizing, improvement science, accelerated design, and digital connectivity. We look forward to hearing from her in January, and I'm just going to check in to see if we've had any other questions come in. Oh, we have a question. What is the top skill or learning that you took away from this experience that you will apply to your new role in the SHA?
I think it's about building a team. So in my new role in the SHA, it's a director role, and there'll be some people that'll be working for me. So I think that skill of being able to bring a diverse group of people together and get them working towards something, whatever that is, and having them build that trust to have open discussions with each other and being open myself as well to the criticism and feedback, or having them be able to speak openly to me about things I could do better, is the skill that I think I'll take most away from Mars Desert Research Station, about how we hold those meetings, how you ask questions to draw some of that out, and honestly how you do check your own ego to say, you know what, I didn't do very well today, what could I do to do better tomorrow? So those are the skills that I'll try and take into my new role.
Great. We have another question. Scrolling back. Comment, first, great presentation and learnings. Struggling to find time to reflect and or journal. Any suggestions on how to do this better?
I guess it would come to scheduling it in almost. I know a couple of my colleagues here at HQC have put no meeting zones in their calendar where they have a half hour or an hour every day set aside for their own personal work, whatever that is, if it's journaling or if it's working on whatever they're working on that day. I would say trying to highlight and carve out a chunk of your day every day or every second day, whatever works, so that you know it, whatever. If it's 7 p.m. after I'm done supper, I'm going to spend 30 minutes journaling and thinking about my day. Or, you know what, at 8 a.m. every day when I get to work, I'm going to spend 30 minutes writing down my thoughts about yesterday. I think if you put that time into your calendar and you know it's going to happen, it's much easier to get to it than trying to find time that's not really scheduled in a busy environment.
Great. Okay, so I think with that, we'll bring our session with Doug to an end. We want to thank you guys so much for giving us your time. We hope that you're leaving this session with some new insights and new ways of thinking. At HQC, we strive to connect people, ignite ideas, and accelerate improvement. Thank you for your commitment to the ongoing learning. We also look forward to your feedback on today's session. You can provide the feedback by completing the survey that will launch when you close out of WebEx. Thanks, and we look forward to connecting again in the new year.
Thanks, everybody.